Welcome to African American History Lesson 23. In this video we will discuss resistance movements and rebellion staged by enslaved people in the United States. Resistance by enslaved people took many forms, and this topic explores the strategies, motivations, and lasting impact of these efforts. Although violent revolts grabbed the most attention, the most consistent form of resistance occurred in the daily lives of enslaved people. Work slowdowns, breaking tools, stealing food, faking illness, and running away were far more common methods of resistance. Churches and religious gatherings also afforded enslaved people opportunities to fight back against their circumstances. Churches not only uplifted enslaved people spiritually, but also enabled them to mourn losses, organize politically, plan escapes, and circulate abolitionist ideas. The transatlantic slave trade often brought individuals who had had previous military experience in Africa. These skills came into play in some of the earliest slave revolts. Africans brought by the Spanish in 1526 to help with the exploration of the Carolina-Georgia coast staged the first non-slave rebellion in what would become the United States. These Africans gained freedom by escaping into nearby indigenous communities, and it is thought that many of these escapees and their descendants grew to be part of the groups known as Marons. The word Maroon comes from the Spanish cimarron, meaning wild or runaway. Maroons were enslaved Africans or African-descended people who had escaped and formed independent communities in remote areas. One of the first major slave uprisings on U.S. soil occurred in 1800 and involved an enslaved blacksmith named Gabriel Prosser. Inspired by the success of Toussaint Louverture in Haiti, Prosser organized a large and ambitious revolt that was intended to seize the Virginia state capital in Richmond, capture Governor James Monroe, and demand the end of slavery and greater rights for black people. The plan ultimately failed because severe storms washed out roads and bridges, delaying movement, and two enslaved men informed authorities, which allowed Virginia militia groups to mobilize quickly. Prosser and about 30 other men involved were executed following secret trials. In 1811, Charles Deslondes, also inspired by the successful Haitian Revolution, led the German Coast Uprising, which was the largest slave revolt on U.S. soil. Nearly 500 enslaved people and Maroons marched toward New Orleans in a quest for freedom, but the rebellion was ultimately suppressed with brutal violence. By contrast, Nat Turner's rebellion was a violent uprising that took place in 1831 in Southampton County, Virginia. It was the bloodiest slave revolt in U.S. history and had major political and social consequences. Nat Turner was an enslaved preacher who believed God had chosen him to lead a revolt against slavery. He was highly religious, literate, and known among enslaved people for interpreting the Bible. Turner said he experienced visions and signs that convinced him the time for rebellion had come. Beginning on the night of August 21 to 22, 1831, Turner and a small group of followers moved from plantation to plantation, killing all of the slave-holding families they encountered. They also collected weapons, such as guns, knives, and axes, and recruited additional enslaved people to join the rebellion along the way. The group grew to about 60 to 70 men before local militias and state troops confronted them. Turner escaped capture for several weeks but was arrested in late October. He was tried, convicted, and executed in November 1831. Immediately following Nat Turner's rebellion, white militias and mobs killed dozens of black people, many of whom had not taken part in the rebellion. Virginia and other southern states passed harsher slave laws, including restrictions on teaching enslaved people to read, prohibiting blacks from preaching without white supervision, and strict limitations on the assembly and movement of enslaved blacks. Public debates about whether slavery should be restricted or abolished in Virginia also erupted in the immediate aftermath of the Gabriel Rebellion, although the abolition of slavery was ultimately rejected. In 1841, Madison, Washington, an enslaved cook aboard a slave ship called the Creole led a mutiny that redirected the ship to the British-controlled Bahamas, where slavery had been abolished in 1833. 133 enslaved people gained their freedom. From the 1830s to 1861, open rebellions were less frequent, due to the implementation of strict slave codes. However, enslaved people continued to resist in other ways. One of the most effective was through the Underground Railroad. Tens of thousands fled slavery, some individually, and some in groups. Harriet Tubman's repeated rescue missions in the 1850s are a prime example. Some enslaved and formerly enslaved people also supported anti-slavery networks, spread information, or aided fugitives. Although not led by enslaved people themselves, John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry in 1859 aimed to spark a massive slave uprising. While it failed militarily, it terrified slaveholders and deepened sectional tensions, showing how present the fear of rebellion still was on the eve of the Civil War. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more African American history lessons, and please engage with the content on social media.